listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows. It's the Open University of the Airwaves. There are no tuition fees, and you are positively encouraged to speak back to the teacher, especially in this time of pandemic, in the year of the corona. It is the College of Knowledge. We'll be hearing from guests and taking calls from all over the world, not just on the narrow, though it's very far from small, health issue of the coronavirus, but of the political and economic impact and reverberations that it is bound to have over the next years, maybe decades, maybe always. I will be speaking about this level. There are some people who think I talk too loud. They write to me and tell me maybe they've got too much time on their hands. Well, there are people speaking more softly on the BBC and MSNBC. If you want to over there, you might like their tone better, but you won't be any wiser by the end of having listened to them. You won't have even begun to formulate your thoughts about the seismic, tectonic shifts that are taking place right now, right in front of your eyes. I hope you're watching. I hope you're listening. I hope you're going to enjoy it. But above all, I hope you're going to tell others and come back again. Next week, it's a stripped-down wartime episode of the mother of all talk shows tonight, but you're still going to enjoy it. Fasten your seatbelts.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. As many of you are watching as well as listening, then here's the drill. I want you, if you're watching on Facebook, to let everyone else know. Every follower, every friend, every contact that you have on Facebook, let them know that we are broadcasting live right now, because this is going to be a very important show at a very important time. My wife will kill me, but I'm taking this off because it's a little bit difficult. Now, it's a stripped-down edition. I'm wearing gloves. As you can see, my normal tea services no longer available. Some of our key staff are down. Others are working from home. And a few of the hardiest of our people are through the glass, and I'm grateful to them. There'll be a medal at the end of this for you. But normal service, I hope, will be provided. There'll only be one key difference. At the top of the hour, we don't have a news bulletin because we were unable to produce it because of health reasons. So at the top of every hour, I'll disappear to get my own tea. You can maybe do the same. A 2-minute break, that's all, at the top of every hour. Now, according to the BBC, Andrew Marr, this is not a time for outrage or jabbing of fingers. Well, I am brimful of outrage. I'm brimful of invective, of rebarbative questioning of the people in charge of our country in this emergency. And I think that's my job. You see, if they'd taken that point of view in 1940, Chamberlain would have continued as the Prime Minister, and Hitler would already have been here. and we might even still be under the jackboot. It's precisely at a time of great national challenge, even existential challenge, that outrage and the jabbing of fingers is most required. Of course, we must all go forward together. But first we have to be sure we're going forward and not backwards, not veering off here only to veer over there later. Do you get my point? I have no confidence in Boris Johnson. If I was the leader of the opposition, I'd table it. It would lose in the House of Commons, and according to today's YouGov opinion poll, it would lose in the public opinion polls, but it would be right, and it would later be proved to be right. It's important when you fundamentally disagree with someone or something that you say so, not hold your peace because you don't want to be accused of rocking the boat. Because I believe our ship's captain is headed for the rocks, and it's my duty and responsibility to say so. Apparently, he's about to send me a letter. And everyone here listening, watching in Britain, you're all about to get a letter from Boris Johnson. It's going to cost the taxpayer £6 million. Now, I'm not sure what's going to be in the letter that couldn't be on the news, on the television, on the radio. It's a very 20th century way of communicating, Boris. A letter, especially a letter from you. I hope you don't lick the envelope that comes to me, because you've got coronavirus. And you've got it because while you were standing at a podium spouting your truisms that might not even be true, you were breaking the very things that you were spouting about even as we saw you speak. You were not 2 meters apart. And now your health minister and your chief medical officer for health are all down, all 3 of you, all down. And we saw the pictures of you in Downing Street, literally rubbing shoulders with each other. So I'm not sure I've got much to learn from you, Boris Johnson. I'm not sure that you know more than me, Boris Johnson. Especially as what you now claim to know is the opposite of what you did claim to know at the beginning. And who knows, may be different still from wherever it is you intend to go if the British death rate and infection rate continues to rise. So if I could play music on here, which I can't, it would be Elvis Presley's Return to Sender. So save the stamp, Boris. Don't send it to me, because I've got no confidence that you have any idea of what you are doing. And I've just read an article in The Lancet, no less. You don't get any more gold-plated, blue-blooded, scientific, blue-ribboned, top of the class than The Lancet. And I've just read there that they think you're making this all up as you go along. As Oscar Wilde might have put it, you are a sofa bearing the impression of whoever last sat upon you. That's the only conclusion I can reach. Now, I don't blame Boris Johnson or Donald Trump for the fact that this novel virus, this epidemic, pandemic, is cutting a knife through us. I don't blame you for that. Wherever that virus came from, and as you already know, I don't believe some of the things that you think you know about that. But time will tell. But I don't blame you for the fact that this virus has begun to cut this scythe through people all over the world. I blame you for the fact the doctors and the nurses have got no masks. When I've got a mask, there are doctors and nurses at the front line treating very sick people, very infectious people, people who may very well die from what they have without PPE. In some cases, with PPE that is out of date. In some cases, with PPE that went out of date in 2016, stamped over with a new false fake date. We've got doctors going to builders' merchants, going to the shops that we go to for a sander or for a ladder to paint and decorate, to buy builders' protective masks. Doctors in a public health service on which we spend a huge sum, but far from huge enough. I'm angry with you because we don't have enough ventilators. I'm angry with you that Germany has got 5 times more ventilators than us, and whose death rate is very considerably less than us. I'm blaming you because we don't have enough intensive care beds in our hospitals. I'm blaming you for the fact that our health service is in such a parlous condition that they're building a morgue in the Excel Conference Centre in the East End of London, so large, 1 kilometre long, and they think they may have to fill it with dead people. I'm blaming you for the fact that our health service, paramedics, emergency workers have been so undervalued, underpaid, understaffed for so long that they may be overwhelmed if this huge rate of increase in the number of deaths continues. When I say you, I don't actually mean you personally. I mean you as the Prime Minister. I mean you as the leader of the Conservative Party. And I mean you as a part of the Conservative Labour coalition, which has governed Britain for 40 years, for the neoliberal orthodoxies that you have peddled and followed. Some Labour supporters don't like me to put it that way. But if you think this crisis all began with the election of David Cameron in 2010, that's only because you're not looking. That's only because you are averting your eyes. I made a film called The Killings of Tony Blair. Check it out. You'll see the way that the Blair and Brown government paved the way for everything that has happened since, not just in wars, but in the war against the public realm that we treasured and which transformed our lives, certainly transformed mine, in the brief historic period between 1945 and 1979, which I go on believing was a golden age for our people and for our country. And if it's bad in Britain, well, the United States now has the most coronavirus patients in the world. It has a death rate that is truly frightening in the steepness of its escalation. And it has a president who literally goes on television and says to governors of states of the Union that because they weren't nice enough to him, because they didn't appreciate enough what he had been doing for them, they would not be getting any more help. New York is the epicenter of the American end of the pandemic. Its governor, Andrew Cuomo, has risen to the occasion. And here's a prediction: he'll be the Democratic Party's nominee for president, on the principle that he isn't Bernie Sanders, and you cannot be serious about letting Joe Biden, sleepy, creepy Joe, out in November against Donald Trump. Last time round in 2016, the US Democrats put up the only candidate in America who could have lost to Donald Trump. In 2020, if they put up Joe Biden, they'll be doing exactly the same again. But back to my earlier point. It's not that I'm outraged by the individuals. How could one be outraged by Tony Hancock? Who is he? Who is he? What has he ever done? He's like a character from The Office on TV, selling paper clips or photocopying paper. It's not these tiny, small, mediocre individuals against which I'm outraged. I'm outraged at the system that produces them and puts them here today, gone tomorrow, in their places of managerial power, they call it, laughingly. It's really a temporary control that they have. You see, for me, times of existential crisis, like the Second World War, like this pandemic, prove that the prevailing economic, political, social system in the world is not fit for purpose. How could it be? If you believe that an unsentient, unalive economic, political system where no humans are involved, just the dead hand, the unseen hand of the market, of profit and loss, supply and demand, if you believe that such a nebulous method of social organization is the best that we can do, well, a crisis like this proves that it isn't. Just like in 2008, the private banks had to be bailed out by public money, so now Richard Branson always defends himself from the charge that he's become way too rich by telling us that he is a risk-taking entrepreneur. Well, he took a risk. He gambled. It didn't work. He has to go bust. Of course, the country, the state, should take over the planes, the routes, should take over the staff, the employment of the people that work for Richard Branson. But the idea that we're going to give public money to a risk-taking entrepreneur whose risk went wrong is simply berserk. Why would you do that? Why would you allow a man who's wrecked the trains, who's sued the National Health Service when he didn't get awarded a multi-billion-pound contract, why would you give a man who lives on his own private Caribbean island precisely to avoid paying tax in Britain, why would you give him public money? You're going to give it to Sir Philip Green, who's closed his Topshop chain, who's stopped making payments to the pension fund? Remember him? Remember pension funds? The man who's walked away from all his responsibilities and who lives on a yacht in Monte Carlo precisely to avoid paying tax in Britain. You're going to bail him out? Let's bail none of them out. Let's learn the lesson this time. The lesson we should have learned in 2008. That it's not true that public is good but private is better. It's not true, because it's only private in the good times. In the bad times, we, the public, have to pick them up off the floor. I'm outraged at the idea that blind forces should be entrusted with our national destiny and, even in this case, the lives of our people, all of our people. You see, in the Second World War, to which I return in conclusion of my monologue, we didn't leave the market to decide who got potatoes and who got coal and who got butter, who got cheese, who got eggs. How could we? If the soldiers at the front knew that their wives couldn't feed their children because a rich person bought all the eggs and all the bread, couldn't keep their house warm because a rich person bought all the coal, do you think the men at the front would have carried on fighting? No. Because at a time of grave danger to the country, there's no room for profiteering. There's no room for hoarding. There's no room for such injustice as undermines the national morale. These are the fingers that I jab. This is the outrage in which I believe. And you have every opportunity, by phone, by tweet, even by email, to let me have your point of view. I've got a poll up and running already. How is your government handling the crisis? A, well. B, badly. C, moderately. Here's the numbers. A, well, 28%. B, badly, 45%. C, moderately, 27%. Get your votes in now on my Twitter feed. I forgot to say, if you're listening in Washington, D.C., we're on FM. If you want to hear it top quality, it's 105.5. If you're in the U.S., then you can listen on AM, coast to coast, across America. And if you're on Facebook, share, share, share. I'll be right back.
Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Tuesday to Loud and Clear for a regular segment called False Prophets, a weekly look at Wall Street and corporate capitalism, where we talk about the big economic issues of the week from the point of view of working people, the poor, and the U.S. position in the global economy. Join us this Tuesday and every Tuesday with financial policy analyst Daniel Sankey right here on Radio Sputnik.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Radio Sputnik, we speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Now, I'll be joined momentarily by one of the best guests ever on this show, and on any show for that matter. He's Professor Richard Wolff. He's a professor of economics. He's the author of Understanding Socialism. He's the host of Economic Update, co-founder of democracyatwork.info. And I'm going to be talking to him not just about the health impact of the coronavirus, but of the political and economic impact too. Because the United States, even less inclined towards socialism than British governments are, has had to throw in something like $6 trillion into the US economy in order to forestall economic collapse, they hope. But most people believe, and I suspect that Professor Wolff does, that the throwing of trillions of dollars at private corporations, the bigger and richer the corporation, the more stimulus it gets, will be used overwhelmingly for these corporations to buy back their own stock, to make their leading shareholders all the richer, and that the impact of the helicopter money, which Trump has also sent out, something like $1,000 per adult, something like $500 per child, that helicopter money will not go far. And when the private landlords come evicting, as they undoubtedly will in not many months from now, as the private banks come foreclosing on people with mortgages, and as is happening now, by the way, already in Italy, where the poor have run out of money and run out of food, we may see serious trouble in the United States. We may see serious trouble in Italy and in Spain, where the sharpness of the criticism of the system and the power is now reaching razor sharp quantities, qualities, properties. So we'll be talking to Richard Wolff because no one better is involved in America to tell us what's happening there. We'll be talking in the second hour to a very interesting man called Dr. John Campbell, who's a retired nurse teacher and A&E nurse. And he has, as indeed the Lancet does today, some very sharp questions indeed about how we have been approaching this whole question. And in the final hour, our very own Moats medic, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, will be joining us. We probably won't do a Hall of Fame or a Wall of Shame tonight, but we will do a That Was the Week. We don't have access to our graphics and so on, so it's a little difficult to do some of the frills. But don't forget, while I'm waiting for Professor Wolff, that I did set you a reading task. I said we would be discussing The Ragged-Trousered Philanthropists. That's the book that you were set to read in March. But because of the extraordinary situation, I haven't been pressing that quite as much as I would otherwise have been. So you now must get a hold of, online, on Kindle, from the library, anywhere that you can find, a copy of The Ragged-Trousered Philanthropists by Robert Tressel. And instead of discussing it at the end of this month, we'll discuss it towards the end of next month. Because we may be in this situation for a very long time. Unless, of course, the policy changes again. In the United States, Trump is determined that American churches should be full at Easter, even though his own ministers and advisors think that's simply impossible, that the virus is in such virulent transfer that we'll be lucky if we are able to go to the beach this summer, not this Easter. I think Dr. Richard Wolff is on the line. Is he on the line? He is.
Yes, I am.
The very man. Professor, Maestro, tell us what's happening in the United States. Start off, if you would, with the health aspects, and then we'll talk about the economic and the political impact of all this, if you would.
I'd be glad to, George. Let me start this way. We are in the early aggressive growth stage of the virus. That is, the statistics are terrifying. Every day, more and more cases. Every day, more and more deaths. And we're just at the beginning. As I assume you know, but in case you don't, we have allowed, under the regime of neoliberalism for 30 to 40 years now, we have allowed hospitals to be closed. We have allowed public health services of all kinds to be either eliminated or underfunded. Because it was not profitable for private enterprises here in the United States to produce testing equipment or ventilators or face masks or any of the other necessary equipment to handle a viral pandemic. We didn't have any, nor did the government, which is committed to private profit enterprise as its highest priority anyway, nor did the government compensate for the failure of the private enterprises to do it. I understand that's how capitalism works. There's no profit in producing masks and test kits and ventilators if you can't sell them. There's no profit in stockpiling them for a year or longer as the precaution would require. And so they didn't. And the government didn't step in and make it happen. The government didn't compensate for the failure of the private system. So we were woefully underprepared. And if you add to that an extremely right-wing government, even more hesitant to do anything that even vaguely resembles criticizing private capitalism for this sort of failure, then you understand that the Trump administration did nothing, which means that as the virus got here, somewhat later, 2 or 3 months later than it got to China, a month or so later, or 12, maybe 6 weeks later, than it got to Italy and Iran. But it got here, and we have now surpassed the number of cases in China, so that we are, in a new way, a number one society, only it's number one in virus cases. The hospitals are overwhelmed. In New York City, where I lived until I left a week ago, because it is too dangerous to live in New York City. Let me underscore that for your listeners and viewers around the world. Tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people have left New York City for an indeterminate length of time because it is the center of the virus, at least now, in the United States. There are trucks, they are called refrigerator trucks, parked on the streets of New York City that are functioning as special extra morgues. They're cold, and so they can hold dead people who have died because of the coronavirus, since the regular morgues cannot handle them, since it is forbidden to have a funeral because it gathers people together, and that's a transmission mechanism. To make all of these gory details get to their central point, we have a health disaster of the highest proportions in the United States. Cities like New York and many of the other cities are now referred to as ghost cities because there are very few people on the street. Everybody is at home. Everybody is terrified, and not the least because the government of the United States is literally not believed. And I mean this literally. What comes out of Mr. Trump's mouth is not believed by at least 60% of the American people. The other 40% apparently, although it's a little hard to be sure, still do believe in him. So let me get then to the point you made. Mr. Trump is facing a political disaster. The evidence of his failure to act, his recorded debunking and mocking of the virus as late as middle February of this year, mean that he is threatened in his reelection. Our election is scheduled for early November of this year. He is in danger because of the health disaster. But the health disaster has now morphed or expanded, or maybe I should say metastasized, into an economic disaster as well. The unemployment officially 10 days ago was 280,000 people. 4 days ago, it had risen to 3,300,000, and we are probably losing jobs here at the rate of 250,000 additional unemployed every day, with no end in sight. Therefore, his election is doubly threatened. First, by a health crisis for which he has major responsibility, and then for an economic crisis which derives from the virus, and again from the failure of the government, since absolutely no program of preparing the country or of coping with the country in its economic collapse has so far been shown to exist. The only thing being done, and I mean this literally, is a massive creation of money thrown into and at the economy. Half of it literally created out of nothing by our central bank, the Federal Reserve, and the other half an increase in government spending that presumably will be funded by more government borrowing. And let me remind you, one of the reasons the virus is having devastating economic effects is because the response of American capitalism to the dot-com crash in early 2000 and to the subprime mortgage crisis, so-called, which crashed capitalism in 2008 and 9, the response to that was, again, throwing money at the problem, reducing interest rates to zero or even below. And what that did is it made every government, every corporation, and most of our people solve all of their problems over the first 2 decades of the 21st century by borrowing money. Therefore, the government of the United States is deeper in debt, as I'm speaking, than it has ever been. Corporate America is deeper in debt than it has ever been. And the people of this country are deeper in debt than they have ever been. The mass of people have 4 kinds of debt, all of which are at or near record amounts. Mortgage debt to buy homes, automobile debt to buy cars, what we call revolving debt or credit card debt to cover their ongoing expenses, and the big new one, student debt, which we never had before, which is now at or near the same level as credit card debt. We're talking trillions of dollars. So the economy is weakened by sitting literally atop a debt bubble, all of which was created not just by Mr. Trump, but by his predecessors as well. He apparently has concluded, however, that he is still going to try to get reelected. The man doesn't know any other way to proceed. And since he can't do much about the virus, that cat is out of the bag. He's decided he's going to try to posture, and that's what it is. This is all theater. The Trump administration is a theatrical production. It has been from the beginning, and it continues to be. The theater now is he has demanded, insisted, that we will all go, I quote you now, back to work on or about Easter time. That is, on or about April 10 to 12. He has asked for the churches to be packed. This is a man who, to anyone's knowledge, in the first 70 years of his life, never set foot in a church, has had no relationship of any sort in a church, has a personal behavior, I was about to say, that is not church-like, but we all know what that's all about. But in any case, he wants the churches to be packed. Within hours of his saying so, the Roman Catholic hierarchy of the United States, the cardinals and archbishops that run the diocese from New York to Los Angeles to Houston, announced that their churches will be closed on Easter, the exact opposite of packed. But he is forcing, because he is desperate, a choice on the American people. And I mention it not only to understand our dire circumstances here, but I suspect that other leaders, I'm thinking of Bolsonaro in Brazil and possibly your own favorite, Mr. Johnson, and so on, may take some clues from this, or cues is better the word I want. He is going to force employers and employees to make a remarkable choice. Are they going to go back to work in crowded work conditions? Are they going to go back into the department stores and other shuttered enterprises where there will be large crowds, thereby risking the spread of the disease that every responsible epidemiologist and doctor has told the population not to do? Or are they going to refuse to work and to refuse to shop? In an ironic twist, George, that I know you and many of your listeners will appreciate, Mr. Trump is creating the conditions under which an enormous number of Americans are going to engage within 2 weeks in what is in effect a general strike, because they will not do in large numbers, how large nobody knows, what is being demanded of them, because they think it risks their lives, which it does. Why would he do such a thing? Because he's desperate. He cannot win re-election being the president who failed to prepare for the virus, who failed to ready the economy for the virus, who failed to prevent the economy from becoming an even worse problem than the virus itself.
There is one way, Richard, that he could win, and that is if his opponent is wandering around, being captured on camera as being no longer actually with us, alive, but no longer sentient. His thoughts no longer connected to his words. His skeletons tumbling out of the cupboard. That is one way he could be elected if the Democrats put up Sleepy Creepy Joe.
Yes, you're quite right. I hesitate to let my brain go in that direction, not because your argument isn't persuasive, it is, but because I need, as an American, desperately to hold on to the idea that people will see, despite Mr. Biden, that they cannot return into office so grotesquely insensitive, incompetent, unjust bully as they have. I mean, the story of Italy in its worst moments 3 or 4 weeks ago, turning to the Chinese government, asking for help and getting plane loads of Chinese doctors and nurses and frontline workers to help in Italy, as they have done, is a stunning contrast to the nationalist turn of Mr. Trump, who has no relationships with anybody, has asked the Chinese for nothing, took time out last week to attack Mr. Maduro in Venezuela yet again, even as the situation here falls apart. It is my hope that you could put Humpty Dumpty up against Mr. Trump and pull out a win, because it really isn't anymore a matter of getting the right person. The right persons have all been pushed out of the running by the centrists, as they like to call themselves, that still control the Democratic Party, the Clintons, the Obamas, all of that. And they're going to do whatever they think is necessary to capture a government back from Mr. Trump. And they're going to use the argument, no matter who they pick, the only argument they have, since they are as responsible as anybody for this mess we're in, they're going to use the argument, anything is better than Trump, and we are the only option that has a chance, therefore vote for us. I should remind you that Mr. Trump got in because people were so disgusted with the conditions of the United States that they voted first in the Republican Party against the old traditional party people, and then in the general election against the traditional old party people in the Democratic Party. They wanted something new. Obama ran on the slogan, hope and change. Mr. Trump was change because he acted in so grotesque a way. Bernie Sanders could have and would have inherited the mantle of something changed, something different. And my view is, even before the virus hit, but particularly since the American voters would have turned to him, because like Obama was different because he was black, and Trump was different because he was outrageous, Bernie Sanders would have been different because he accepts the label socialist. And as I could tell you, America is changing dramatically. A clear majority of people 35 years of age and under now say in poll after poll that they prefer socialism to capitalism. If I could add one thing, the so-called rescue program that was produced and signed into law over the last 3 or 4 days is a classical Keynesian, that's in honor of your Lord Keynes there, a Keynesian throw the money again, as they did in 2008 and 9. I want to remind everyone, doing what they're doing, dropping interest rates virtually to zero, throwing huge amounts of money into the economy, what it produced was a serious increase in the already hobbled debt dependence of the American economy. It worsened the inequality of income and wealth. It made it easier for the tiny minority at the top not only to accumulate unheard of amounts of wealth, but also to use a good portion of it to literally buy 90% of the political system and force it into this kind of behavior. And it also impoverished the mass of people. It is now a staple of both Republican and Democratic Party campaigns to bemoan the end and the loss of the so-called American dream and of the so-called American middle class. They're not left. And the mockery of this latest bill is to say to an over-indebted, anxiety-ridden working class, we're going to give you $1,200, which will not carry them through 2 to 3 weeks of a barely minimal life. It is beyond words, but for someone like me, and I guess it's for you too, George, we are experiencing the consequently rapid radicalization of politics in the United States. No one was prepared for this. All the conventional politicians were caught flat-footed, unaware, unprepared, way out of their depth. And the people of this country are looking in all directions, left, right, you name it, for new directions, new leadership, and being cooped up in your home, as we all are, is making all of this go very fast.
You're right, and that was a quite stupendous tour of the horizon in the United States. I knew that nobody could do it better. You didn't disappoint. Professor Richard D. Wolff, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Alex, on the other hand, says USA deaths per 1 million of the population, 7. Italy deaths per 1 million of the population, 178. Seems the USA is doing great under Trump. I wonder if you still think that, Alex, having heard Richard Wolff for the last 20 minutes or so. Mary Blair says, sending out a letter to tell us what has already been said on air. What a waste of money. A bit like Cameron's letter, re-Brexit, waste of money. And Paddy says, tackling a deadly virus with our NHS wearing pound shop equipment and crowdfunding for supplies, whilst Bozo sends out his propaganda leaflets. And YouTube comments. Tariq Al-Sulbi, let's talk about the media and how it's giving our elderly anxiety. And Gold Inc. says, who cares about Israel? Care about our own problems. Palestine's biggest problem is their own leaders. Fact. Oh, the prize goes to you, Gold Inc., for the biggest non sequitur of the evening. Emily Cavendish says, I frankly don't care about things which poorly informed people erroneously believe to be a real nation state. In reality, there is no such thing as Palestine. Who's talking about it? Emily? Ivan Degnan says, talk about the money, George, the crash. Lol, there's no money, no one can get bailed out. Remy Cherry says, anyone else here believe the virus was leaked from that virology lab in Wuhan? Well, that is a possibility. It's also a possibility it could have been leaked from that virology lab, that germ warfare enterprise in the United States, now closed. Ethical Revolution says virus and superbugs come from animal farms, just like Spanish flu originated in Kansas. Next one is bird flu from the 65 billion chickens bred and killed each year. And Planetary Citizen says, I want to know when we get the self-testing kits to see if we have the virus. Good point. Must Be Trouble says, I don't think you just realize a virus without the vaccine. Coronavirus either just naturally mutated or accidentally escaped. And emails. Tony says, Trump's bailout will cost around $6 trillion in total. How long until we're talking about quadrillions? Are quadrillions even a thing? I've never heard that word before. Jim says, my wife is a senior registrar in York Hospital. She told me that there are many doctors and nurses becoming infected by the virus in hospital, and she's getting worried about her own health. She said one of the reasons the infection rate is so high within the hospital is because doctors and nurses from departments that are not directly dealing with COVID-19 patients are not allowed to use face masks to protect themselves. She said this decision is to be made is made by the hospital trust management, not the healthcare professional, because there isn't enough PPE available to give to everyone. Well, God bless your wife, Jim, and all her colleagues. I may say that the Lancet article to which I referred at the beginning of the show was so damning that it called for, amongst many other things, the resignation of every single healthcare trust in this country. And later we'll be asking Dr. Ranjeet why exactly we need healthcare trusts. Tony says, where has the UK taxpayers' money gone? Our NHS is crippled, our infrastructure ancient, woeful. And here's some poll replies. How's the poll doing, by the way? Okay, well, A, how's your government handling the crisis? A, well, 32%. B, badly, 45%. C, moderately, 23%. Don't forget, we'll be talking to Dr. John Campbell right after the break. Anyway, poll replies. Paul, living in Auckland, New Zealand, into our 5th day of lockdown. Glad to have a competent, kind leader in Jacinta Ardern. She's done a fantastic job so far. And Ali Ansari says, millions of Indians stranded as a result of poor planning before the country went into a sudden lockdown. Migrant workers having to walk hundreds of kilometres to get home, while others starve from lack of essential supplies. Thousands gathered at transport hubs, increasing the risk of corona spread. And on Twitter, Jason Motz, M-O-T-Z. As a Canadian, I've never been happier to live north of the USA. As much as I love UK pop culture, I wouldn't swap my healthcare today with yours. Not even for a date with Simone Marie Butler. Some of the younger lads can let me know who she is. YouTube comments. Ant H says, coronavirus is Project Fear on track. And Osmond says, George doesn't believe coronavirus is a hoax. Nah, I really don't believe it's a hoax, Osmond. I mean, just how many people dying, how many people suffering, how many doctors and nurses crying into your camera do you need before you drop this unhinged disease of libertarian conspiracy theories? Really, I despair at you. Jason Mills says, good evening, George. Good evening, Jason. Ali Najafi says, 1 million salutes to the great George Galloway. Thank you, Ali. Abdul Jalil Adamu says, today the Western world wants us to unite, thanks to coronavirus. And Ian Robert Houghton says, Gigi, go into the figures of reported infection and how that is established without a real COVID test. Well, there is a real COVID test, but only for those that turn up at the hospital already sick. There's so much misinformation, disinformation, failure to understand information out there that I wish I could stay on the air every night, really. Ted Davison says, Macron is a vindictive man. So glad Gigi called him out. So much for our so-called friends across the channel in times of crisis. And Jorn Joensen says there is a mutation of this virus out there, no doubt. Hayan Fazli, sad news today. More frontline staff will die as we are increasing our viral load. And Mr. Bush lied, says Galloway all the way. Here's to George Galloway, the next mayor of London. Thank you, Mr. Bush. Lied. The crazy chef one says, I love Gigi, but I'm so fed up of him running interference for China. I don't know what that means, Jeff, but you could always call up and put to me what it is you've got in mind. I think you know my view on how China handled this crisis. I don't resile from a single word of it. All for Synchronicity says, it is breaking my heart how many people have fallen for the scamdemic. It just shows how many have lost faith. Even our world leaders are blinded. You see what I'm up against all day, every day. I have to deal with this nonsense. And Delirium says, the gloves merely keep those around you feeling better, more secure. They've succumbed to the fear. No, I've got gloves on because there might be a virus on this table. And if I pick it up and take it home, I might give it to my pregnant wife or my young children. Please, please wake up. Betty Caps says, good morning from Arizona, USA. Peace and love. And to you, Betty. And Echo and the Bunny Woman. Brilliant title. George has fallen for the government and MSM propaganda. It seems very disappointed. Yes, me and Professor Richard Wolff and President Vladimir Putin and President Xi of China. We've all fallen for the MSM Western propaganda. Come and take us away, for God's sake. Now, I'm going to take a break, just for 3 minutes exactly. We don't have a news bulletin tonight for the reasons I explained. So please don't go any further than your kitchen to put the kettle on for tea. That's what I'm about to have.
Breaking news, expert analysis, and exclusive stories, all in one place. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
On Sputnik with Max Kaiser and Stacey Herbert. Tune in.
Well, maybe mention like central bankers and markets are doubling down. Not you're saying everybody's doubling down. They're crazy.
They are. Everyone's crazy.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Fios TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey, everybody. My name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Goats and Guns. Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning and I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day, I tune to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Monday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for our regular segment, Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers, where we take a look at the state of education across the country. What's happening in our schools, colleges, and universities, and what impact does it have on the world around us? Our resident expert is Bill Ayers, the legendary activist, educator, and author. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Monday and every Monday for Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the regular segment called Veterans for Peace, where we focus on the contemporary issues of war and peace that affect veterans, their families, the country, and the world as a whole. Veterans for Peace President Jerry Condon joins the show every Thursday. Hear about this and more every Thursday right here on Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, welcome back. I've got my tea. Hope you've got yours. Here's the poll. How is your government handling the crisis? A, well, 31%, down 1. B, badly, 46%, up 1. C, moderately, 23%. 1,105 of you have voted. It's about time you did. You can vote on my Twitter feed. Now, I have, any minute now, Dr. John Campbell, retired nurse teacher and A&E nurse on the line. And we'll be talking to him about this coronavirus issue. I just want to read out the latest numbers. Most coronavirus cases. The United States, 124,697. Italy, 92,472. China, 81,439. Spain, 78,797. Germany, 58,137. France, 37,611. Iran, 35,408. The United Kingdom, 17,136. Switzerland, 14,352. Belgium, 10,836. The Netherlands, 9,819. South Korea, 9,583. Austria, 8,291. Turkey, 7,402. Canada, 5,607. Portugal, 5,170. Norway, 4,048. Is Dr. John on the line? Dr. John Campbell, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Now, I'd like to tax your expertise a bit on one or two aspects. But start off, please, by telling us how you'd vote in my poll and why.
That's a very good question, George. Now, the reaction of my government and indeed governments around the world and indeed the World Health Organization has been one of varying their tune as they've gone along. So a lot of people started off reasonably badly, and then they've got gradually better as time goes on. So the whole problem is really that world governments and a lot of leaders have been reactive rather than proactive. They're reacting to the situation that they find themselves in rather than anticipating the situation and working ahead about it. Now, if you'd asked me that question about a month ago, I would say the answer was it's quite abysmal, that we're not taking anything like enough precautions, that we're not taking this seriously enough, that they don't really understand what the word pandemic means. They might be able to write it down on a blackboard, but pandemic, what it really means for the people, the death and the suffering and the disruption that causes. I just don't think they got it. And if we looked at people in Parliament, not just the UK Parliament, but anywhere in the world, people were still close together, they were still shaking hands. They just weren't getting it. But for the last week or two, since we've had the lockdown, I think now the government really understands. I think the penny has dropped. I think the message has got through. And the way we're handling it now is really getting quite a lot better with this lockdown. But there's still a lot of things we can improve. And the big thing that's missing in the UK response, although it's there now and it's starting today with the drive-through testing for NHS staff, is just that, testing. We need massively more testing. So we're suppressing this epidemic, this pandemic from on the top, but we need to pick away at it from the bottom by specific testing, by isolating every case, by quarantining all of the contacts of that case. Then we can have a much more surgical approach rather than this blanket top-down approach that we're using. But right now, I'd say they're trying really hard. Boris has ordered 3.5 million tests, which is a great start. We're going to need a lot more than that. But I think now the government has got its bit between its teeth. It realises this is a serious global problem, and it's actually doing quite well as of the last week.
Why do you think so many people, including watching and listening to this show now and writing in, simply don't believe it? They think that, let me talk at the more respectable end of that kind of attitude, would be the Daily Mail journalist Peter Hitchens, who doesn't deny that the virus exists, who regrets every death that it causes, but insists that a significant number, perhaps 2/3 or more than 2/3, of the people who died in the last 3 months in Britain would have died this year anyway.
I don't think that's accurate. I mean, the coronavirus and the COVID-19 disease, we know is exacerbating other conditions and is more dangerous in other conditions. And we know that the older people are, the more likely they are to die if they get this condition, because they're going to get complications from it. But these are people that could have lasted for many years into the future. We simply don't know that. So it seems like there's a bit of denial going on here. This is a virus that makes people very sick and can cause acute conditions. So, for example, of all the people that get it, while we're grateful that most people, about 80%, get a fairly mild illness, we know there's about 12%, or some studies say 14% of people that get really quite ill with this, up to the point where they might need some medical intervention, such as additional oxygen, such as intravenous antibiotics, such as intravenous fluids. But we also know there's about 5% of people get critically ill with it. And this is what is causing the death of these people. And without a lot of intervention, then the case fatality rate will rise. And we know there's a case fatality rate in this. In Italy, we've seen a horrendous case fatality rate. It's been round about, well, some of the figures work out at 9 or 10%. Now, we don't believe it's anything like that high. The chief medical officer still believes that round about 1% is a nearer figure. But you can't argue with the science that of 100 people that get this infection, about one of them is going to die. That is just simple epidemiological science. That's simple maths. And to deny that it's a bit like being in the Flat Earth Society or something.
It is, a lot of them are Flat Earth types, and it's a fad. Extinction Rebellion, Flat Earth. And now deniers of the coronavirus. However, the percentage of people who die is only quantifiable if you know how many people have got it. And you can't know how many people have got it until you have either randomly tested the whole population or actually tested everybody in the population. In other words, if 10 out of every 100 that you have tested are dying, you've got a 10% death rate. But if there's another 1,000 times more people that have never been tested but may have it, then the proportion of people who die from it is very much smaller, isn't it?
Absolutely, George. The case fatality rate can only be accurately calculated at the end of an epidemic when you're looking back retrospectively. Only at the end then will you have an antibody test so you can see how many people have had it. So if we look at the horrendous death rate in Italy at the moment, which has been around about 10%, well, we know that's actually dropped quite a bit in the last few days because Italy have instigated much larger scale testing, and they're testing many, many more people. So as they test more and more people, there's a greater denominator at the bottom, and the death rate looks relatively smaller in terms of percentage, in terms of case fatality rate. But having said that, the Chinese Center for Disease Control did do a study of about 72,000 people who were diagnosed positive in China, and did come to figures round about this 1% mark. And also, as well as that, in South Korea, where there's very extensive testing, very advanced testing, again, the figures are working out at round about 1% because of the large amount of testing. And again, in Germany, because there's been a large amount of testing, the case fatality rate there does appear to be lower. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, how many people in the UK have got COVID-19 infection now? The answer to that question is we simply don't know. It's likely to be at least 10 times the official figure, and some people say it could be 1 million or well over 1 million. Now, if that's the case fatality rate is going to be greatly lower. But there's a big proviso here, in that people have got probably an incubation period of, say, a week on average. It can be 2 to 14 days. And then they're sick for a week or two. And only usually in the second week do people develop severe complications. So typically someone is not going to die until 2, 3, 4, or even 5 or 6 weeks after the onset of symptoms. So there's a big lag in the amount of deaths. So when the total amount of deaths are counted up in a few weeks' time, it is going to be higher. But there again, when we do more testing, we're going to know what the numbers are, and it's going to be higher. But we're never going to know the true fatality rate until we do this antibody test. You probably know there's two sorts of testing. There's the antigen test, which tests for the presence of the virus. Is someone infected now? And there's the antibody test, and I believe we're getting a lot of those quite soon, that shows where the virus has been. It's testing for the immune protein that the virus has made in people's blood, and that will tell us who has had it. And it's only, as you rightly say, when we test the antibodies of everyone in the country, know how many total cases there are, and then compare that to the total number of deaths, that we'll have the accurate case fatality rate. But the current estimate of 1%, I'm afraid, might not be too far out at the end of the day when we calculate these final figures in a few years' time.
Of course, if it's your mother or my mother that dies from it, they're 100% dead, and we've 100% lost them. So I'm not quite sure where some of these conspiracy theorists are coming from, because a lot of people's mothers have already died, and they might well, as you say, have lasted another year, 2, 5 more years. And there's a remarkable, I don't know, equanimity with which these things are viewed. It's funnily enough, people who think of themselves on the left but are positively Malthusian in their willingness to see the elderly, the weak, the infirm go to the knacker's yard. But what do you say to this point, Doctor? There's a difference between someone dying with coronavirus and someone dying from coronavirus. In other words, coronavirus may have been the tipping point, perhaps, but so many other conditions, weaknesses, underlying problems existed in that patient that the coronavirus is only one of the factors.
Yes. So if people die with coronavirus, that by definition means it is an acute illness, because someone will contract the virus will multiply inside their body, and then they'll get clinical features about a week later. And the virus is going to be detectable for a few days before they get clinical symptoms. Indeed, is going to be transmissible for a few days before they get symptoms. And then the virus is going to be present in appreciable numbers for about 8 days after that. So what that means, most people are only going to have an infectious dose of the virus for about 10 days. So if people die with coronavirus, there's only a 10-day window in that time. So it's very likely that that virus has been the actual facilitating cause or the actual precipitating cause of their death. It's not like, saying, prostate cancer, where you can have it for 10 or 20 years before it kills you and people die with it rather than from it. I believe these people are dying primarily from coronavirus and COVID-19 disease. And, you know, to me, this is an absolutely central point, because what is it that makes a society civilized? You know, to me, civilization is defined by the way it looks after the weaker members of that society. And while in epidemiology and this sort of study, we do have to talk about numbers, and that's necessary to have that objectivity and talk about numbers. But at the same time, we have to remember, as nurses and doctors, that these are human beings. As anyone, we have to remember that they're human beings. And as a society, I judge the advancement of a society and the civilization of a society by how it treats its weakest members. And we need to look after the weakest members of our society. But having said that, I think our government is doing that now with this lockdown. So this is very encouraging. They're no longer seen as expendable. The initial policy of the government, where we were going to go for herd immunity, would have involved horrendous losses. And just thank goodness that they actually changed that. And they changed that based on modelling from Imperial College London.
Although Imperial have a patchy record, according to Professor at Edinburgh University, I'm quoting him, I think, accurately, and the Oxford University study gives a different picture, and Imperial themselves now say that the 250,000 figure of likely deaths in Britain can now be expected to be around 20,000, in other words, 1/10 or less than of what they originally said. Is there a danger that we could be following a policy based on flawed analysis statistics?
There's always that danger, but Imperial College are actually using accepted epidemiological techniques, and they are a centre of the World Health Organization as well. And of course, that's a completely separate debate as to how the World Health Organization have done in this. But what they have is very sophisticated mathematical epidemiological models, and these have been developed quite extensively actually over the past 20 years. But they're based on the influenza virus. But having said that, the transmissibility of the influenza virus and the COVID-19 coronavirus is fairly similar. And in fact, the coronavirus is more transmissible than the influenza virus under usual conditions. So the modelling they're using, the models they use are fairly sophisticated. And that initial data that showed that there was going to be a horrendous amount of deaths is one reason why the government changed its strategy. And I believe this new 20,000 figure that Imperial are now talking about takes into account the lockdown and anticipates the increase in testing that's going to happen. But it's still sobering to note that 20,000 is probably the minimum amount of deaths that the government is anticipating. So I think we have to be based on science, George, because if we're not based on science, we're based on opinion and subjectivism. And we have to be as objective as we can, and we have to go with the evidence that we've got. And I do see that has happened to some extent. And I really believe the strategies that we're following now of the lockdown and the way we reduce the social interactions, we know that does greatly increase the transmissibility of the virus. Not that it changes the transmissibility of the virus itself, of course. It doesn't change the biology of the virus. But what we have to remember is this virus can only live inside the human respiratory tract. It can only multiply inside human cells. And if we physically separate those human beings, we deny the virus that opportunity to transmit. Therefore, we break up its lifestyle and stop it from transmitting. And this is what we've seen with the reduction in number in China, the stabilization of the numbers and reduction of numbers in South Korea, and again in Taiwan, and to some extent in Hong Kong, although Hong Kong have backslidden a bit lately as some of the restrictions have been reduced.
What about this last point, Doctor? And I'm grateful for your time.
Pleasure.
A few of the lads in the office this evening by the grace of God, have not had any corona symptoms, but they're going nuts. They're going mad, cut off from life, stuck in their houses, some of them unmarried, some of them champing at the bit. There is a mental health cost as well as a societal cost, and of course not to mention a gigantic economic cost from this period of lockdown and isolation, isn't there?
You're absolutely right, George. I mean, technically at the moment you can't take your girlfriend for a walk if she doesn't live in the same household.
Quite.
It really is. These implementations are quite draconian, but they are based on this epidemiology. But we have to remember that people are body, soul, mind, spirit. We are eclectic, holistic beings, and we just have to be so aware of the anxiety, the stress, the mental stress. I mean, for example, I'm on record as saying that there'll be an increase in birth rate in December, which is 9 months from now, of course. And there'll also be an increase in things like, I regret to say, probably domestic violence, divorce, all sorts of problems with people being forced to stay in the household. And for young people, especially, as you say, who are chomping at the bit, they want to get out, they want to be doing things, they want to be living their lives. It's very difficult for them. And we really have to come together and support each other in this and realise that everyone is in the same position. And this cost is immense. But the alternative is a cost which is probably even higher, and that is many people will die. And this can include young people as well, because although the probability of death increases with comorbidities, although the probability of death increases with increasing age, we still get some tragic cases of young, fit people with no comorbidities that get this and die. This tragic case of the ENT surgeon, for example, who died today after working in an A&E department. I don't know. We don't know why young fit people sometimes die, but they sometimes do. So the balance is: are we going to put up with this confinement for what may turn out to be a good few months, to be quite honest, or are we going to risk the individual's death going out, and as they come into other contact with other people and come into contact with vulnerable people, the almost certain risk of quite a few of the vulnerable people they're going to come into contact with. So it's a really difficult equation. I don't pretend to have the answer, but what I do know is we need to support each other through it, understand our anxieties, understand our frustrations, and communicate. Human beings are communicators, and we have to come alongside people allegorically, even if we can't come alongside them physically, and really support people as much as we can through this. So make that call, make that internet connection, make that Facebook friend, and just make people feel included, that we're all going through this together, because we are.
Dr. John Campbell, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, I did a short on this subject. Joe, are we in a position to show people that? Okay, we'll try and get it up later. If not, you can get it online easily enough. Let me see some of the social media. I think I've done all the social media, so let me take a quick break.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the regular segment called Veterans for Peace, where we focus on the contemporary issues of war and peace that affect veterans, their families, the country, and the world as a whole. Veterans for Peace President Jerry Condon joins the show every Thursday. Hear about this and more every Thursday right here on Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, that was the week that was. Can you imagine in 20 years' time, 25 years' time, people looking back at this week and the last few weeks? It will be truly extraordinary. But in this week in history, here's what happened. On this very day, March 29, in 1971, U.S. Lieutenant William Calley was found guilty of murder at a court-martial for his part in the My Lai massacre, where troops under his command wiped out in cold blood, in mass murder, 500 South Vietnamese civilians. Calley was in charge of Charlie Company, a unit of the 11th Infantry Brigade, who were on a mission to root out Viet Cong soldiers, of whom there were none in the razed village. The massacre came to light a year after it happened, after investigative media reports. In 1969, journalist Seymour Hersh, with whom I'm proud to have worked, won the Pulitzer Prize for his expose of it. The My Lai crimes included mass murder, rape, sodomy, maiming, and assault of civilians. William Cayley was sentenced to life with hard labour, but within 3 days he was out of prison pending appeal on the personal instructions of then President Richard Nixon. He spent the next 3 years under house arrest at Fort Benning in Georgia. Freed on bail in 1974, his sentence was then cut to 10 years for 500 murders, but he was paroled later that year after completing just 1/3 of that sentence. Calley remains alive. The 500 innocents remain dead. Also on this day in 1971, Charles Manson and 3 members of his hippie cult were sentenced to death in Los Angeles. They were found guilty of the August 1969 murders of 7 people and 1 unborn child. Their victims included 8 months pregnant actress Sharon Tate, the wife of the film director Roman Polanski. It had been one of the longest-running murder trials in US history, with a jury sequestered for longer than ever before, 225 days. The California Supreme Court abolished the death penalty in 1972, and the 4 were given life sentences. In April 2002, Manson was refused parole for the 10th time, and the 3 other conspirators have also had numerous parole applications refused. Jumping forward a couple of days, it was on March the 31st, 1966, that Harold Wilson's Labour Party won a sweeping 96-seat majority in the UK general election. I worked very hard for that. Prime Minister Wilson hailed the result as a great victory. It was only the 2nd time that a Labour government had been voted back into power. However, Labour lost popularity when it devalued the pound in November 1967. Plans for trade union reforms had to be shelved, and France vetoed Britain's 2nd application for membership of the then European Economic Community. Although Labour enjoyed something of a revival in 1969, Mr Wilson went on to lose the 1970 election to Edward Heath's Conservatives. He was elected, though, Mr Wilson, for a 3rd term in government in March, so that should be February actually, of 1974, when the party scraped a working majority. But in March 1976, he surprised everyone by announcing he was resigning and making way for an older man after just turning 60. I got to know Harold Wilson very well after his resignation. I spent a lot of time with him in his gloomy flat behind Westminster Cathedral. He told me a lot of things which I'm not yet in a position to divulge. Earlier in this week, on March 28, 1979, a nuclear leak at the 3 Mile Island plant in Pennsylvania caused panic in America. Radioactive steam leaked into the atmosphere. The accident happened as a result of human error and equipment failure when a water pump broke down and the plant was partially shut down. 3 Mile Island remains the largest nuclear accident in US history. It's apart from the bombs they dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It attracted enormous public attention, although nobody died as a direct result of the accident and the subsequent radioactive fallout. On March the 30th, 1981, I remember this well actually, as if it was yesterday, US President Ronald Reagan was shot and wounded by a lone gunman who opened fire in Washington. 5 to 6 shots were fired as he left the Washington Hilton Hotel, where he'd been addressing a union convention. about 1 mile from the White House. He underwent emergency surgery at George Washington University Hospital and made a fast recovery. John Hinckley, 25, the son of an affluent oil industry executive, was charged with trying to assassinate the president, fueled by an obsession with actress Jodie Foster and a desire to impress her. The following June, Hinckley was found not guilty by reasons of insanity and was committed to hospital. Again, on March 30th this time, in 1951, an American electrical engineer and his wife were found guilty by New York's federal court of passing atomic secrets to the Russians. Julius Rosenberg, 33, and his 35-year-old wife, Ethel, were accused of stealing technical information from the Atomic Research Center in Los Alamos and turning it over to the KGB. The Rosenbergs were sentenced to death on the 5th of April, 1951, and despite numerous appeals for clemency, were executed by the electric chair at Sing Sing prison on the 19th of June, 1953. They were the only people in the United States ever executed for Cold War espionage, and their conviction fueled US Senator Joseph McCarthy's anti-communist crusade against un-American activities by US citizens. However, records and later testimony from intelligence sources in the US and Russia suggest the Rosenbergs had only been involved in giving information to Soviet contacts in support of the war effort against Hitler. Skipping quickly over April Fool's Day, although it was on this day in 2017 that Bob Dylan received his Nobel Prize for Literature. Who writes this stuff? It was on April the 2nd, 1982, that Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, provoking a war with Britain. The islands off the coast of Argentina had been a cause of friction between the two countries ever since Britain seized them in 1833, emphasis on the word seized. The war cost the lives of 655 Argentine and 255 British servicemen, many of them sailors, who died during attacks on warships. The Falklands War ended on the 14th of June when the commander of the Argentine garrison at Port Stanley surrendered to British troops. The victory greatly boosted the popularity of Margaret Thatcher's government, which went on to win the next election. Famous birthdays this week include John Major, that's a famous birthday, the former British Prime Minister, who is 77 today. Tomorrow is the birthday of rock guitarist Eric Clapton, who will be 75, who'd have thunk it, and also the actor Robbie Coltrane, who will be celebrating his 70th. And here's an odd, if seminal, celebration. March 31st in 1967 was the first time that Jimi Hendrix burned his guitar on stage in London. It brought the house down. Well, almost. April 2nd in 1939 was the day the late and great soul singer Marvin Gaye was born. I was just thinking about that. On the same day, but in 1977, Fleetwood Mac's Rumours album went to #1 and stayed there for 31 weeks. Wow. Now, give me your calls if you're able to get through, 02077 982 255, or if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet us, of course, at George Galloway or at RTUK News. I'm not getting any calls. Is that because no one can get through? Echo and the Bunny Woman says the Clintons, Gates, Rothschild, and the other bunch of psychopaths will be behind any compulsory vaccine that is unleashed upon the world. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Alan Harris, does the Dr. Richard realize that young people like socialism because they are idealistic, and also that the young don't vote? And All for Synchronicity says, God bless you and all that is dear to you, George Galloway. Thank you. Dean Jones says, George with rubber gloves. Now that's a sign we're all doomed. And Simon Burtonshaw says, tea mugs need thorough cleaning. Hope you brought your own into the studio tonight, George. And El Gato says 85,000 US citizens contracted the COD-19 virus, but the real number is possibly 2 or 3 times that by now. Well, it's well over that now. Danny Blaine says, Boris, the only person in the world with COVID who can talk for 10 minutes without coughing. Universal Earthling says fatality rates go down as more and more people get tested. Quite so. Cytoplasmic Nanobots says world flu figures are just as bad the same season. Yeah, but the coronavirus is on top of the world flu figures, not instead of. You don't get corona, but not flu. You get flu if you get flu. You get the corona too. Robert Blay says, George, please ask Dr. Campbell if the NHS can and does use megadose intravenous vitamin C therapy against the virus. After all, they use megadose intravenous vitamin K therapy for liver cirrhosis sufferers. And Diane Sykes says the tests are not reliable. Jalal Nasser says the mortality rate does not take into account the tens of thousands of people who the government themselves say may have had it with little or no symptoms since January. And Winston Smith says nobody knows anyone that's been seriously ill, but the world is locked up, Big Brother. What do you mean nobody knows anybody that's been seriously ill? Are these all phantoms that are dying in the hospitals? Are these doctors and nurses all actors that are telling you how horrific it is, how they don't have enough equipment to treat people seriously, infectiously ill, lying in front? Are they all making it up? Are they all lying, Winston? What do you mean nobody knows anybody that's been seriously ill? You half-wit. James Scott says Italy has a high death rate because of age. Well, what about Spain? That's got a high death rate with much lower ages. A little knowledge is dangerous. Of course, Italy has a higher proportion of its citizens, particularly in the north, over 60. But Iran has far fewer under the age of 60, and it is under the cosh, under the hammer. Keith Chalmers says, why do dogs and cats not have pandemics as well? And John Lee says, which Conservative MP do you think should lead the country? You're asking the wrong man. Jupiter says herd immunity is a long-term plan to save lives in the long term. It is being pursued by our European neighbours, Sweden and the Netherlands, for instance. I suspect you're dismissing it because you don't like the Tories. Be honest now. No, I'm dismissing it not because I dislike the Tories. That's a given. Of course I dislike the Tories. I'm dismissing it because it is a cruel, vultural, murderous a way of dealing with an epidemic, because it says, let the epidemic rip and let it take the hindmost, let it take the slowest, let it take the oldest, the weakest, the sickest. And I just don't think like that. That's not the moral, religious, and political framework that makes me up. And Gary Young says, Boris must have a friend in the business of manufacturing stamps who needs a financial boost in these times, because it is totally pointless. Someone should tell him to call that off. Sending 28 million letters to tell us something we either already know or he could tell us on the television, and which will be out of date before the letter arrives. And Jane says many of these experts don't seem to understand that if there is mass testing, the negative people will go out en masse, creating a roundabout attack. Let me take a break. I need more tea.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the regular segment called Veterans for Peace, where we focus on the contemporary issues of war and peace that affect veterans, their families, the country, and the world as a whole. Veterans for Peace President Jerry Condon joins the show every Thursday. Hear about this and more every Thursday right here on Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Let's go to the lines. Sean's on the line from Stevenage in Hertfordshire. Yeah. Sean, go ahead.
Hey up, George. How are you doing?
Okay, I'm staying alive, staying healthy, by the grace of God.
Aye. A couple of things I want to put observations to you tonight.
Okay.
I was actually in the local hospital last night for a bit of a routine scan thing, nothing related to the current business. But while I was in there, and this is really addressing those folk that are ringing in or emailing you saying it's all a conspiracy and all this, you know. We all know there are different theories and reasons why things happen to what the mainstream media tell us, and I'll get to some of that in a bit. But I was in the local hospital. I went in, and a big guy approached me. What are you doing? Oh, I've got a scan letter. Can you just stay out of the way? We're just bringing somebody in who's really sick, and we need you to stay back. And I watched two nurses or doctors fully kitted up with all the plastic gear on, the face mask, and the shield over them, and some poorly person on a drip, on a trolley, and they ran down the end of that past corridor, past where I was stood. They ran with that person, and the guy was running in front of them, clearing the corridor. So I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing by what they were wearing that this person was pretty ill with the current virus.
Yeah. Very good point. Very, very good point.
And I went and had my scan, and I have to say, again, what Dr. Campbell, what some of the other people have been saying about the rest of the nurses, none of them had face masks. Some of them were wearing gloves, but they didn't all have the rest of them in the other parts of the hospital. And what the hospital was having to do was use like pallet trolleys and boxes and things to block off parts of corridors when they're moving people, to keep people away. We're not prepared for all of this.
No, I mean, and that's
this is ridiculous.
Because for 40 years we've had governments that didn't value the
Absolutely.
NHS. They told us that they did, but they were in fact underfunding and privatising it. They were fattening some bits up to make them more attractive to privatisation. They were creating all these trusts. What's a trust? Why don't we have a national health service? Why does it need to be broken into trusts, each with a manager and a deputy manager and an assistant deputy manager and all the multiplication of costs and so on? The reason is to make it more plump and more easily plucked for privatisation, for the likes of Richard Branson, who couldn't run a railway, can't run an airline, but wants us to pay for it. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Branson's got, 308 billion quid or something of his private fortune. He should bail his own bloody airline out.
4 billion. He's worth 4 billion.
He's got more than enough money to bail out most of his own airline then. Let him get on with it. Like you said earlier, that's the risk he runs being in that business.
A risk entrepreneur. Listen, thanks very much for that call. I've got to press on. There's loads of people now. Nestor is in Maryland, in the United States. Go ahead, Nestor. Nestor, are you there? We've lost him. Can we go to Said in Bolton? Let's hear from Said in Bolton on the subject of PPE shortages. Said, go ahead.
Good evening, George. I just wanted to raise 2 points, George. Point number one, just quickly on what you mentioned before about people dying with coronavirus or people dying from coronavirus. Even if somebody doesn't die directly because of coronavirus. If you did a comparison to HIV and AIDS, nobody dies from the disease itself, but because of the immunosuppression that it causes, and then they get pneumonia. Now, it's a bit of a skewed comparison, but the stress that somebody has on their body because of the coronavirus can cause other things to go wrong and cause the death, not directly, but this was just one point. My main point I wanted to talk about was PPE. Now, the problem that I've seen, George, is that the trusts themselves have to follow NHS and Public Health England's guidelines. And NHS and Public Health guidelines for coronaviruses, for dealing with patients with coronavirus, is basically to wear a surgical mask and gloves and an apron. Now, I've asked them for the evidence of why this is, woefully inadequate, but why this is the guidelines that they've put out, and I haven't really seen anything. And if you compare this to what China's guidelines are for the public who have low risk. This is not hospital staff. This is public who are just going about their normal days, going on buses, who have a low risk of coronavirus, is to wear a surgical mask. Now compare that to the frontline staff who have to deal with confirmed cases of coronavirus, the same PPE. This is the main problem, is that the hospitals can't overturn the NHS Public Health England's guidelines. So I would just ask your viewers to tweet them or make it a little bit more awareness on Twitter. They have a Twitter account. What's the evidence that they've used to come to these guidelines? And why is that?
I mean, we are a country, still more the United States, that send our atomic weapons around the world, send our aircraft carriers around the world, project our power, our cruise missiles, our intercontinental ballistic nuclear missile potential, but we don't have gloves and face masks for a potential epidemic? What kind of country is that? What kind of system is that?
We're the fifth or sixth richest economy, George. I can't remember at the top of my head. And you look at countries like Malaysia. So you look at countries like Malaysia, and they're wearing multiple layers of protection against query coronavirus cases. We're wearing not even one full layer against confirmed.
I hope there's a reckoning when this is all over, Saeed. People would be very silly if they don't. Thanks very much for that call. We've got Nestor in Maryland on the line. Let's hear from Nestor. Yes.
Hey, George.
Great to hear from you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I actually just came from Thailand this Tuesday. The last Tuesday that just passed, I was over there for like about a week. I had to cut my vacation short because everybody was getting stuck. So I didn't want to go get stuck over there.
No, of course.
And and I wanted to, there's such a staunch difference between the way the rest of the world, at least in Asia, is handling this crisis. Over there, they had checks as soon as you got to the airport. They had checks as soon as you got off, before you got actually out of the airport, in the supermarkets. And the malls. And here, when I came back, they didn't even ask you, as soon as I got to the Dallas airport, they didn't even ask you if you were feeling well. They didn't check your temperature, and people were just going out. And there was about 2-3 people that were coughing like crazy on the airplane back to the States. And I'm just very surprised. And also, supermarkets, they don't do any checks. And I feel like that kind of sets a narrative where a lot of people here in the States are very hubris, because I'm seeing a lot of people at the parks very close to each other, not even 6 feet apart. So it's kind of insane, It's what's going on?
I'll tell you what, Nestor, never mind Thailand, which isn't badly affected. We are still receiving flights into Britain right now, this evening, from Iran, Italy, Spain, China, places where the coronavirus crisis has torn the population apart. You can still get on a plane in those places. You'll still fly in here. You will still not be tested. You will still not be isolated. I mean, but they've got drones hovering over moorland looking at a couple out for a walk for their exercise and criticising them. They are buzzing people in Shepherd's Bush for sitting together on the grass. But you can still fly in from Spain, Italy or Iran, and are doing so right this minute without anyone even asking you how you're feeling. Nestor, thanks for that call. Albert's in Honolulu, in Hawaii. Can't resist that one. Albert, go ahead.
Hi, George. How are you? How are you holding up?
Still holding out. Thank you very much, Albert.
Well, a couple of points I'd like to make about the whole global coronavirus issue. Well, really, pandemic. The first, since I haven't had much to do but stay around the home and stay around the apartment, I've been interviewed on a couple of shows as I am an ex-journalist. And on one podcast that I was interviewed on, the point that I made about this whole crisis is that this is essentially, in my assessment, an economic crisis that is tethered to a health crisis. What the coronavirus has done is unleash a larger crisis, which I believe to some extent was going to happen, but perhaps not in this way, which is a larger economic crisis. In the U.S., I believe that the American economy has not really worked for workers. It has not really worked for employees. This was before the crisis. And this is because of long-term issues in regard to the United States. I don't believe the American economy has really worked for most people, including employees, since the 70s, because of not only Nixon taking the U.S. off the Bretton Woods.
I'm going to cut you short, Albert, because it's a good call but a bad line. I've got Danny, I think, on the line. Let's hear from Danny. Go ahead, Danny. Not yet. Okay. I'm sorry, Albert. I just couldn't make too much sense out of what you were saying laterally, but I was going to make this point to Richard Wolff, and I would have made it to you if we could have continued. Is this: at the current rate of unemployment, 250,000 a day in the United States, U.S. unemployment will shortly be over 25%, which is what it was in the Great Depression of the 1930s. I'm talking tent cities. I'm talking dust bowls. I'm talking people jumping off buildings in despair. I'm talking about a depression that cascaded around the world. That's what I mean by depression. The United States may very well be on the edge of that. Danny in Washington, is he there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead,
Can
Danny.
you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Go ahead.
George, I love your show.
Thank you.
I'm just calling in. I'm just beside myself I'm a 72-year-old retired civil worker, I guess you'd call it, an artist. And the U.S. Congress last week passed a bailout for corporations. I mean, they keep saying $900 billion, but it's more like $4 trillion. And this was done without a vote, a recorded vote, in both chambers of our Congress. It was done on a voice vote. There's no recording who voted for it, who voted against it. Now, Bernie Sanders, who I support very strongly, he got up and he did a little kabuki theater about, I'm going to get unemployment benefits, blah, blah, blah. And as I understand it, listening to the news and reading the news, that was a completely kabuki theater. The unemployment would have been there anyway. Also, AOC from New York, she gets up in the House and she gives this, speech about how can we stand for this? They're ripping us off. The corporations are getting billions, and the workers getting nothing. And then she doesn't vote against it. She didn't vote. It's all theater. The leadership of the Democratic Party has completely failed us. Now, Richard Wolff was on, who I admire, and he was speaking about, surprisingly, that in a short time, people are going to be ready to strike, a general strike in the United States. They gave us $1,200 each and 6 weeks of unemployment. They gave trades to the banks. They're still pumping money into the banks. Because if you remember, George, under the old system, before the bailout in 2008, they had to vote on that, whether the Federal Reserve could pump money into the banks. And they had the TARP bailout. Well, they changed the law where they don't have to vote on it anymore. They just do it.
They just do it. Thank you very much indeed for that call. I need to take a break. Normally for the news, we don't have news because the newsreader is down, unwell. Forgive us. But stay tuned, because coming up after the break, amongst other things, is Dr. Ranjeet Brar, our very own Moats medic, who'll talk about not just the medical, but the economic and the political aspects of this, the year of the corona. Stay tuned. Don't go far.
Breaking news, expert analysis, and exclusive stories, all in one place. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
On Sputnik with Max Kaiser and Stacey Herbert. Tune in.
Well, maybe mention like central bankers and markets are doubling down. Not you're saying everybody's doubling down. They're crazy.
They are. Everyone's crazy.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find it on
Global Higher Education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts, the mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Files TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey, everybody. My name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold, Goats, and Guns.
Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning, I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day. I tune to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every Monday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for our regular segment, Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers, where we take a look at the state of education across the country. What's happening in our schools, colleges, and universities, and what impact does it have on the world around us? Our resident expert is Bill Ayers, the legendary activist, educator, and author. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Monday and every Monday for Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the regular segment called Veterans for Peace, where we focus on the contemporary issues of war and peace that affect veterans, their families, the country, and the world as a whole. Veterans for Peace President Jerry Condon joins the show every Thursday. Hear about this and more every Thursday right here on Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Now, we're about to be joined by the most popular medic that I've known on television or radio, because he talks clearly and he doesn't hide from the political and economic backdrop to this, or for that matter, many other health issues. Health cannot be separated from the rest of society. It's not something that exists in a bubble. If an economy, if a society is not taking care of people's health, is not properly investing in its health system, then people are going to get sick, not just from the coronavirus. And I'm glad to say that Dr. Ranjeet Brar, NHS consultant, physician and vascular surgeon, joins me now by Skype, of course. Welcome, Dr. Ranjeet. Nice to see you. I hope you're still healthy. But of course, a lot of people that were healthy last week are not healthy this week. How does it all look to you so far?
Pleasure to be with you, George. Thanks for having me on again. Again, it's been a week with many and rapid changes. So, as you say, I'm a vascular surgeon, and my practice is very much affected. But I'll start perhaps not talking about my practice, but those of my colleagues. I think the people who are really on the front line are those who are in our accident and emergency services, nurses and doctors, those who are in our intensive care units, nurses and doctors, our anesthetic colleagues who are increasingly being repurposed and recruited into anesthetics as our ITU care settings and emergency care settings, as are a lot of our general medical colleagues and even some of my surgical colleagues as well. The NHS is doing its absolute best to repurpose itself using the tools it has at its disposal. But I've been in touch with many friends and colleagues that I've made over my 20-year training and career within the NHS, up and down the country, and the picture they're painting, I was on a Turkish channel invited me to be on. I'm sure they must have seen me on your show, George. I'm otherwise an unknown figure, really. They invited me on, and I was privileged to be on with Roberto Caselli, who's a professor of intensive care medicine, and he's there at the heart of the epidemic in Italy, in Lombardy. And I'll come back to a couple of points he made in a second. But he pointed out that this is fundamentally different from other viruses, because there's still a lot of talk that this is simply the flu. And there's a lot of talk, and it was a point that I kind of made when I first started talking to you. The numbers are small and comparing it to flu. But the fundamental difference I think that we have to appreciate between this virus and the flu is the fact that it does cause this severe acute respiratory syndrome. It does cause this, what he termed, Professor Caselli termed, a viral pneumonia, which is a good way of looking at it. And it's that which makes it so deadly. And although we know it spares, relatively speaking, the younger population, already I've spoken to colleagues who have been caring for people who are presenting with this virus, extremely short of breath, unable to breathe for themselves, who are as young as 20 and 30, and having to be intubated. If you look at the intensive care data that's coming out of the patients who have been admitted for intubation with this care, their average age is about 55 to 60, not old, George. And I bring these points up. Perhaps I'm saying things that are not unknown to your listeners, but there's an undercurrent. I think it's very strange for many of us to be restricted in our movements, restricted in our homes, locked down. We feel it's a relatively oppressive regime, though I think on the whole, it is through persuasion that it's being maintained, but we can come back to some of the new legislation that's been enshrined around the coronavirus, because I think that's important as well, and possibly undermines the effort to actually persuade the public. But it's different because, it is extremely dangerous, and perhaps 10% of the patients who catch it will need hospitalization, and perhaps 5% of the patients who catch it will need ventilation. And that leads us to look at the figures of how this has taken off. While in Wuhan, in China, the numbers have now really plateaued. They're genuinely static. And there are some fantastic documents and videos that are released to show just why that is. The incredible public health measures we've mentioned that they've managed to successfully put into place. But that is not the case for the world. For the world, this is really going into an absolutely exponential phase. So there are 700,000 cases around the world. But of course, those are the cases that have been tested and that we know about. There will be many, many more. And of those, 32,000 have died. That means on a world scale, of the total cases, and many of those do not have an outcome yet, people are still unwell. Of the total cases, we know that already 4% have died. That's a huge figure on a world scale. And if you look at Italy, you're looking much closer to 10, 11% of the confirmed cases have died. Now, that's a huge mortality figure. When I first spoke to you, we wanted to compare this pandemic in particular, or perhaps I did as a useful way of referencing it, the 1918-19 flu pandemic, the Spanish flu so-called. That had probably a mortality rate of 2% and caused 50 million deaths worldwide. The population of the world is much more dense now. If we were to assume that 80% of the population did get, the world population really did get this virus, and it's spreading very rapidly, it's not beyond the realms of possibility. That would be, you're talking then about 150 million or more people dying. And I really do think we have to say they're dying because of this virus, not just simply with this virus. Yes, we know that people who have comorbidities are more at risk, but I think we would have to clearly say that this virus is lethal to those people who catch it.
Well, look, I'm powerfully moved by what you say, but there are a lot of people, actually they're beginning to drive me nuts, who say that this is all, I don't know who they've got in mind, that has persuaded you, me, Vladimir Putin, President Xi, and so on, what Western propagandist, what closet fascist who wishes to create a new world order, or all the other ludicrous allegations that are thrown. This is bloody serious, Ranjeet.
It absolutely is, George. And I think it's an interesting undercurrent. I think partly we have to say our own governments and their initial responses to blame. They were very, very keen when this first happened to use it for cheap propaganda, point scoring against China, and somehow say that this was China's fault. But imagine if the entire leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, say their central committee, had come down with coronavirus. President Trump, our own leaders, Boris Johnson, if he's still leading the government, now that he, Chris Whitty, and of course our health minister, Matt Hancock, all came down with coronavirus within 24 hours, they would have had an absolute field day. But the fact that this is spreading throughout our royals, throughout our MPs, throughout our government, shows you how widespread it is. I mean, I do think it brings up a point about testing, that why is it that celebrities, royals, MPs are being tested? Why is it that royals are being told it's okay for them to go to their second home to protect them, whereas the general population are encouraged to stay, if they're lucky enough to have a second home, in their first home? This is something that affects different people of different economic brackets very differently, but it is very real, and working people need to take it seriously. Of course, when our government initially said they were going to take it on the chin, let it run through the population, and all they did apparently to prepare was lay down emergency legislation, which is draconian and is repressive, because it has such measures as no more than 2 people should be allowed to meet, that people can be detained for 48 hours without any reason, that it gives unlimited ministerial power. So all of these are incredibly draconian measures that do arouse hostility and suspicion amongst wide sections of the population, particularly when large numbers of working class people are anyway alienated from the government because they don't believe that our government has their best interests at heart. So for all of those reasons, and I watched Peter Hitchens, someone whose politics are very different from mine, who are very different from yours, but sometimes does take a courageous and independent stand against the prevailing orthodoxy of normal propaganda, normal mainstream media. He spoke out quite powerfully against the Iraq War, for example, and therefore has his own following and a certain gravitas. I heard him speak on Talk Radio. Talk Radio even had invited me to speak a few weeks ago, very briefly on their news. So I heard him speak, and it was interesting. He does quote sources, he does read, he does think. He's quoted, for example, a German immunologist, and I went and I had a look at a little YouTube interview with that German immunologist, who pointed out that in Germany, their mortality rate's a lot lower. It was 0.03. In fact, it's catching up. It's coming up to 0.7, which is as low as China got it with very good health measures. And it may be that Germany has a much higher incubation rate of intensive care beds and general acute beds, and it has more ventilators. It has about 8 times as many ventilators as the UK. It may be that they never have such bad mortality figures as the UK, because in the UK already we know we have 20,000 cases. I fear it's much more than that. If you see the way it's spreading through wards, spreading through hospitals, spreading through the healthcare population. I know, for example, that 1/4 of the ambulance staff in London are off sick, self-isolating. Of course, we don't absolutely know whether they have the disease or not because they're not being tested. And Matt Hancock, or in fact, it wasn't Matt Hancock. So when the government and the A team, if you like, went down with COVID, they did actually, for the first time, wheel out Simon Stevens. So Simon Stevens, who is actually the de facto, the real head of NHS England, the chief officer of NHS England, and he made an announcement that they were doubling the testing by next week. But still, our testing is woefully inadequate. There's been signs that our government has secured 3.5 million tests. If you have a look at where those tests are, they've not reached the front line. Some people are starting to be tested, but overwhelmingly, frontline nurses and medics haven't been tested, don't know, therefore, whether they have the symptoms, don't know whether it's safe for them to work. So these are the aspects of our response which are not joined up, which have led to people thinking, to be honest, they can't take it very seriously. If you see the social distancing that's happening in China in areas where they genuinely were concerned and have locked down, because they didn't lock down everywhere, they did rigorous testing, rigorous contact tracing, encouraged people to self-isolate, tested people 3 or 4 times to make sure, 1, they had the virus, and 2, then were clear and negative before they're allowed to go back into society. So strong measures, strict measures, but appropriately guided and targeted measures through a population who are trusting of their government because they know their government has their best interests at heart, and in a government that was able to mobilize the resources, the economic resources, the health resources of the entire country to deal with the problem, and didn't have to reckon, if you like, with the furies of private interest. Our government has been able to, and we must say they have put measures in place, but it's largely a massive bailout. There's been a huge economic crisis and crash, which we're kind of distracted from slightly by our unusual physical conditions of being locked in the house. But 1/3 of the value of the stock market worldwide was wiped out within the course of a week. There are massive, implications for that, which will be long-term economic problems, and that the underlying epidemic, which is not one of just the coronavirus by itself. It's the underlying epidemic, if you like, of poverty and inequality. And that means that it's very different for me, who, if I'm locked down, I have a house and I have a garden and my wife is at home with me and we have kids, but we will look after them and we have food. We found that there are 3 to 4 million children who, despite the lockdown, are having to go to school every day in order to take their food. So not being properly isolated from the risk of the virus, and will carry on spreading the virus precisely because actually they're food insecure. We have so many people in our own country, the 5th richest country on earth, who are insecure. Imagine what the situation is going to be like in proper third world countries where there really is not the health infrastructure to test or treat people. I know, and I'll just give one brief example of India. My father is Indian. Currently, he's staying in India. Modi there has been praised by some for locking down the country. I normally would be very skeptical of praising Modi, and now when I'm seeing how that lockdown is being enacted, I'm right to be skeptical. Working class people in India work hard for small amounts of money and they migrate all across the country. With the lockdown, those large working class communities have been chucked out of their jobs, a lot of them in construction, a lot of them in agriculture. They've lost their wages. They've lost their ability to feed themselves. There's no transport, but they've been told they have to go back to their ancestral villages, sometimes halfway across the country. So they're migrating, all over the country. And of course, India said they've got less than 1,000 cases. And what that really means is that there have been very few tests. My one hope is that what we're seeing with our proven tested cases are the extremely sick end of the spectrum who are turning up in hospital disproportionately unwell compared to those who have mild disease and are not being tested. But the only way that we'll really know that is when we roll testing out on a much wider scale. And 3.5 million tests, I hope those will really be seen on the front line. But much like the PPE crisis, and there really is a crisis of personal protective equipment, because one, this virus is much more infective than normal bacteria, which is the infections that hospitals normally deal with. We haven't ever tried to stop the cold passing from person to person because it's not a very severe infection. This is more infectious than the cold and a lot more deadly. So it is very hard to contain. And those kind of pictures from Lombardy, pictures from Spain, pictures from China that we've seen of that very full protective gear is what's needed, particularly for exposure-prone procedures, endoscopy, surgery.
Words fail me that the 6th richest country in the world with a seat on the United Nations Security Council, a nuclear-armed military power, doesn't have enough personal protection equipment for its own health staff. Dr. Ranjeet, thanks as always. I hope you'll come back next week, and I hope we'll have some better news, though unlikely that seems. Thank you very much indeed for coming back on the show. Sean says on Twitter, it's hard to tell how the government did. We'll find out in the weeks to come. And Jamenta says the same thing. Tommy says, do you think the coronavirus may push us into a cashless society? I see that's one of the tropes currently running. Who cares? I've actually no interest whatsoever whether the pound in my pocket's got the Queen's head on it or her backside on it, or whether I have to spend on a plastic card. Really, if you think, I've got people writing to me saying there's helicopters up in the sky, they're spying on us. If you think the government needs a helicopter above your street to spy on you, you need to get out more. And if you think that a cashless society is going to be in any sense different from a cash society, I just want people to have more cash, whether it's in plastic or paper. Joe says, in Italy, Lombardy specifically, if you die of leukemia in hospital and you test positive for COVID-19, even post-mortem, which they are doing, your death is caused by COVID-19. George, I work at a printing company. I'm on 0-hour contract with an agency. The company I work for declared themselves essential. All the staff are disgusted that we have to put our lives at risk so they can make money. And email from Martin, forget COVID-19 for a minute. The burning question is what happened to your Yorkshire tea mug, George? The person that looks after it never came in. Thanks very much. Let's take a break.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the regular segment called Veterans for Peace, where we focus on the contemporary issues of war and peace that affect veterans, their families, the country, and the world as a whole. Veterans for Peace President Jerry Condon joins the show every Thursday. Hear about this and more every Thursday right here on Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, the first poll's closed. How is your government handling the crisis? A, well, 30%. B, badly, 48%. C, moderately, 22%. 1,476 of you voted. Here's the second poll. What's the first thing you'll do after it's over? A, greet extended family. B, go to the pub. C, kneel in thankful prayer. A, greet your extended family. B, go to the pub. C, thankful prayer. That's a good one, actually. I don't know who came up with that. Anyway, Tony's in Liverpool. He's on the line. Tony, go ahead.
Good evening, George. Hope you're well, my friend.
Yes, so far so good. Thank you.
Yeah. It was fascinating listening to Richard Wolff earlier, George. A really, really knowledgeable guy. And I think it's apparent to everybody now that basically we are back now at 2008. It's clear that what we have witnessed since then was artificial. It was inflated. It's fiat currency, which has been pumped into the stock market to pump up the share prices, likewise with the banks. And now we've got ourselves in a terrible situation whereby we're now at zero, or as Richard Wolff said, in Europe right now, negative interest rates. If that happens in the UK and the US, what we're looking at then is a run on the banks, George, because people will not pay the banks to look after our money. So people will obviously get worried and they will start to withdraw their own money from the banks. What will happen then is the banks will put a block on the amounts of money that can be withdrawn. So we will have rationing of paper money, which is where we're not far away from that now. And the stock markets, you see them every day, George. The red one day, blue the next, red, blue. The stock market, basically, they know that the US is weak, and they want the US
and yet
to
the
carry.
And yet the dollar is extremely strong.
Well, at the moment, George, but the G7 are obviously, they've got together. They're trying to sell their dollars now to weaken the dollar itself. Now, if the dollar falls, the whole of the US financial system is kaput, and obviously the European system, the euro, will collapse. We are not that far away from that now. Now, unless they can get some stability into the stock market, i.e., they're going to have to keep bribing them with more and more fiat currency, keep them printing presses going, trillions become multi-trillions, quadrillions. This could be absolutely catastrophic. And this is down to just pure, unadulterated greed, absolute greed. The stock market is basically they're being bribed with trillions now, and that basically what's happening is they're not happy, they're not getting enough money. So they're saying, no, Monday morning, the stock market's open again, we want more from you. Donald Trump then goes back to the Fed and says, print some more money out. So the Fed says, okay, we're going to issue government bonds. The corporate market, the bond market, don't want to buy them because they're scared. So eventually the Fed has to buy back its own bonds. So it's insane, George. What's happening now?
Yep.
And what's happening?
Insane. They're coming to take them away, I hope. Thanks very much for that call in Liverpool. I cut it short only because I've got to go to Minneapolis, where Michael is on the line. Go ahead, Michael.
Hey, George, how you doing?
Good, thank you. What would you like to say?
Well, I'm very frustrated with the coverage and the sort of cynical mainstream media coverage in the United States, or I guess I should say lack of coverage of the Tara Reade rape allegations against Joe Biden, which are very credible. And she worked for him, and she told people at the time. And if anyone has heard the interview, it's absolutely heart-wrenching. And I compare this to to previous Me Too situations.
Yeah.
When Brett Kavanaugh was accused of rape, when Al Franken was accused of sexual assault and harassment, the whole world knew overnight. It was in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, it was on all the cable news channels, etc. There has been total radio silence. And it's taken a consistent Twitter effort just to get places like Huffington Post to even mention this thing. And so far, most of the mainstream media is still zeroing it out. And I guess I want to hear your thoughts, but also my point is that it shows the cynicism of the Democratic Party. They like to use sexism and misogyny and racism when it serves their purposes.
Sure.
But when it's going to, affect Joe Biden, who they've decided to try to steal the primary from Bernie in order to push him, all of a sudden it's crickets. People like Howard Dean and Neera Tanden not saying anything, or else they're saying that somehow, Howard Dean even suggested that she was somehow in Russia's pocket, which is the most absolutely insulting, absurd bit of propaganda I've ever heard.
I did see that one. Of course, all roads lead back to Russia. The Democratic Party and the people who support it really hate Russia, and the Republican Party and the people who support it really hate China, and each accuses the other of being in the other's pocket. And now a woman comes along. She makes allegations. I don't know if they are true. But what I do know is that culture has grown up, particularly on the so-called progressive side of politics over the last decades, that women are to be, in principle, believed, and that their allegations have to be properly investigated as if they were true. And the person making the complaint is automatically referred to as a victim of rape and sexual assault. And none of these things are happening to the case of Joe Biden. Now, I don't know if Joe Biden is a rapist. What I do know about him, already on the public record, is enough in itself to disqualify him for being the candidate in November. But when you add this to it, it surely makes him a dead duck. So I wouldn't confuse the silence with serenity. I think it's a stunned silence on the part of the Democrats, not just at this rape allegation, but at the very clear and rapid mental deterioration of Joe Biden. He is not fit to be let out alone. He's not fit to be put in front of a camera, and he's definitely not fit to fight a presidential election in November. So I'm pretty sure that in this stunned silence, there's a big, desperate search going on, Michael, for a different candidate. Over to you, last word.
Hello?
Yeah, you there?
Oh, great. Can you hear me, George?
I can't. Who is this?
Oh, are you going back to me? Sorry, I 100% agree with you, and it's so frustrating. People forget that, Bernie Sanders was the first candidate in history to win the first 3 primaries, and somehow this conservative media effort and Obama rallying the party behind Biden, and now they're just going to push Joe Biden come hell or high water, and it doesn't matter what the voters think. And so it's just a frustrating situation for those of us who have, put our hearts and souls and all of our free hours into getting Bernie elected.
Yeah. Well,
so
don't give up. Don't give up.
Situation.
It's important that he doesn't give up. It's important that he doesn't throw in the towel, because, frankly, anything could yet happen. Michael, thanks for the call. Christopher's up next in Berkshire in England. Christopher, go ahead.
Hello there.
Hi.
First of all, I'm 28 years old. I'm originally from Bulgaria, but I live here kind of 7 years now. I want to say, first of all, for those that don't believe that the virus is real, I got infected 2 weeks ago. I haven't been tested, but I can assure you my lungs shut down within 5 hours after a sore throat, okay? And I was at home. So I went through it, but I want to tell everybody out there that doesn't believe that this is real. The virus is very real, and it's very dangerous, okay, first of all. In terms of the UK handling of the situation, when I called the first time, 111, in the beginning, there was some said there is a drive-through and things like that. The actual nurse on the phone told me that this is a lie, and it's not true. And there's a lot of lies that are happening. So, obviously, the UK doesn't have an exit strategy. I don't know what the exit strategy is right now in terms of after all of this and when it's going to be over. But what I'm most concerned swine lines, the UK produces very little domestically, and it's really dependent on all the countries around.
That's good. The line keeps cutting out. Let's go on to Tess in Wales, and we'll try and come back to you because I have some questions for you. Tess, on the line in Wales, what could happen after the pandemic? Tess, are you there?
I'm here, George. How are you doing, mate? You're right.
Okay, go ahead. What would you like to say?
Yeah, basically, you just said it. Where are we going with this? You know, where do you think we're going to end up after this is all over? I mean, if it ever is all over, that's another question entirely. We could have another pandemic afterwards, perhaps. I mean, it amazes me the PPE thing. I've been listening to your callers, and it's a banging show tonight, you know, and your guests and callers talking about PPE. That's the biggest thing for me, really.
It's the most visible evidence of the utter failure of our governments over decades, because this didn't happen since Boris Johnson came in. Didn't happen since David Cameron came in.
We've always had health and safety executives getting more and more health and safety executives on us for years, and you can't go on site without a hard hat, but you can go and fight coronavirus.
Exactly. We've got.
So where do you think
we're health and safety conscious in society as a whole, except for our frontline doctors and nurses dealing with highly infectious diseases. That frankly doesn't compute. So who is responsible? It's a systematic responsibility. If you decide you are going to have a society where the public realm is impoverished, is made shabby, is deteriorated, is sold off its best bits to private concerns, then when an epidemic comes along, a pandemic comes along, you're going to be bowled for six. And the reality is that both parties, Labour and the Conservatives, have been either more publicly or more covertly complicit in this degradation. Our public services have been degraded. They've been degraded in every respect. The salaries of the people who work in them, degraded. The equipment that they've got to work with, degraded. The buildings in which they have to work, degraded. The honour and respect given to the people in those services, degraded. And loads of money. A guy working on a computer screen shouting, buy, sell on the floors of the supermarket is sold to us as a real economy, as a real success. And it seriously is not. Tess, are you still there? Unfortunately not. Troy McCulley says social distancing is nonsensical. Tell you what, Troy, why don't all you flat earthers gather yourselves together? You could do it online and then arrange a place to meet, preferably, you know, Dartmoor or Exmoor or Glencoe, somewhere absolutely remote. Why don't all you flat earthers go and have a convention? Why don't you have a march? You can march up and down some desolate area. You can fraternize with each other. You can hug and kiss each other. You can even have sex with each other. You can exchange bodily fluids with each other. You can breathe on each other. Then we'll see if social distancing is nonsensical or not. Durruti, 1936, says it's not as bad as the Black Death of the 14th century, the Great Plague of the 17th century, or even the Spanish flu at the end of World War I. Still awful, but don't exaggerate. Well, it's only just started, Durruti, so how come you're so confident that, for example, it is not as bad as the Spanish flu of 1918 and 1920? Dr. Ranjeet Brar, who probably knows a little bit about more about medicine than you do, Durruti, I'm inferring that you're not a doctor, You may be, in which case, if you are, I apologize. But Dr. Ranjeet Brar made a comparison with the so-called Spanish flu not half an hour ago. And who are you to say that that's wrong? It might, I pray it won't. Maria Richmond says, if you don't want COVID-19, don't go outside. Leave the rest of us alone. Not sure what that means, Maria. So the rest of you are outside getting COVID-19. Is that your point, Maria? Chief 0174 says, very naive is GG. Does he not even know Bill Gates has the patent? Hysterical fool. Tell you what, Chief, why don't you and Troy McCulley get together for a meeting to discuss that? How Bill Gates set this pandemic going. How Bill Gates is planning on killing and has already killed thousands of people. Why don't you? Why don't you go and have a meeting, you and Troy and possibly Maria Richmond? Go and have a meeting about this. Christopher in Berkshire's back on the line. He's had the virus. Let's hear from him. Christopher.
Hello, can you hear me better now?
Yes, better. I want to ask you how quickly you fell ill and how long it took you to feel better.
Well, I actually have a history on that, but I'm just trying to be as short as possible here. But basically, from a normal cough, which it was like 5 o'clock at night, till 1 a.m., I had my lungs almost shut down, and I couldn't breathe, basically. And I mean, I can't even explain to you I've never felt like that. And I've been through a lot of illnesses in my life, in terms of just general flu. But this is something, and I'm 28 years old in peak condition. So I don't smoke. And for those that out there that think that this is a joke, what can I say? I mean, people, basically what I think is people, the change and the danger is coming too quickly, too much, that the human mind cannot adjust to the reality that is. That's the problem.
Yeah. I think that's right. And, you know, our leaders, political leaders, corporate leaders are so bereft of credibility, so disbelieved by the population, hated even by the population, that anything that they say must be disbelieved, that anything that happens is a conspiracy. And Bill Gates is often found at the center of that conspiracy. For some of them, Jewish names leap into their minds and find their way into the triptych of conspirators. It's a very sad state of affairs. Christopher, thanks for coming back on the line. Edward is in Vancouver. Let's hear from him. Edward, go ahead.
Hey, George Galloway. Just great. Like always, respect your opinions and speaking truth to power. So
thank you.
Wanted to get that out there.
And lovely Vancouver. I've spoken there many times. I love it. It's one of my favorite cities. Go ahead.
One thing I just wanted to say is I agree definitely with the previous caller that this is a very serious thing. I'm 30 years old, and I think I've had it as well, and I've been struggling with it for almost 2 weeks to get over it. So for anybody that's listening and downplaying it, it's definitely a serious situation. So for immunocompromised people and elderly people, you know, to get this thing, it would definitely be a very bad situation. So, yeah, I just wanted to mention, I wanted to hear your thoughts on what coronavirus would mean for the Palestinians. You know, I read this one article that basically said that Gaza has 40 ICU beds for 2 million people who are under siege. And, yeah, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on what you think about what's going on in Gaza.
I think that's a very specific case. But there's a general issue also. I'll deal with the specific case first. The people in Gaza are in an open-air prison. It is nothing more or less than that. There's no entry and no exit. There's no entry for the means of life. There is no exit for the desperate in need of treatment abroad. The people there, 2 million of them, as you say, are absolute prisoners in an open-air prison surrounded by barbed wire. They have nowhere to go, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, either from the aeroplanes or the shelling from the sea or the shelling from land or the coronavirus. They have almost no intensive care beds. They have almost no ventilators. Israel has just taken delivery of a given number of ventilators, and it distributed to the West Bank a grossly disproportionately small number of those ventilators. So far as I know, it has distributed none to Gaza. So Gaza and the West Bank are facing catastrophe in this non-existent virus that some people are talking about and mailing me about. But it's true also of the poor world in general. I didn't see it, but my wife was watching an item on the screen yesterday, about self-isolation in a township in South Africa. How do you self-isolate when 6 of you live in one room, in a shack? How do you wash your hands regularly and thoroughly when you have no access to clean water? How do you live as close to a sterile life as you can when you have no proper sanitation or sewage? How do you watch your diet when you have no money with which to eat? How do you phone 111 when there is no 111 and when you have no phone? How do you get intensive care treatment in a hospital that isn't there and when there has none of the paraphernalia of which we speak here in developed countries? So this is a profound point, Edward, and one which we haven't even really begun, but may have to confront. That Egypt, for example, the teeming millions of Cairo, the millions of slum dwellers in Egyptian cities, if, when the coronavirus sweeps through Egypt, how biblical will the cost be? Thanks, Edward, for that call. Poll number 2, what's the first thing you'll do after it's over? A, meet your extended family, 38%. B, go to the pub, 37%. These are not mutually exclusive, of course. You could meet your extended family in the pub. 25% of you, though, and I'm proud of you, will, as the first thing they do after this is over, will give thanks to God in prayer. 464 people have voted on that. You've still got time to change that balance on my Twitter feed. Matt is in Suffolk. He wants to talk about the homeless. Go ahead, Matt.
Hi, George. Good to speak to you. I've been a long-time listener, big fan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And I want to thank you for the work that you do. I think, to be honest, I really, really appreciate it, and I'm sure a lot of other people do too.
Thank you, Matt. God bless you. Thanks.
What I wanted to ask you about really was to get your opinion on something that I picked up on in the news today, which I haven't heard anybody else talk about yet. And that is the fact that the government have said the local councils need to take in all of the homeless people off the streets.
Yeah, in hotels, yeah.
So the way I read it was that basically we have just solved homelessness in the UK overnight.
Temporarily, yeah, because the hotels will reopen again. But yeah, I take your point.
Yeah, so my point is people have campaigned to help the homeless for years. People have donated millions and millions over the years since, way before my lifetime, and probably will continue after my lifetime. So why is it that we can take these people in and sort them out because of the coronavirus, yet in the normal scheme of things, nobody seems to sort of give a damn, really?
Well, that's the society we live in. That's the way of the world in the world we have. It's not the one either I or you would design, but it's the world we've got. And the short answer is because the health of the poorest person in Britain today is capable of affecting the health of the richest. If a poor homeless man coughs, that cough can spread this virus all the way to Buckingham Palace or wherever Prince Charles lives, wherever Boris Johnson is currently residing. You see my point? It was never more true that we were all in this together, because the health of the weakest has the capacity of affecting the health of the strongest. So that's the first reason why they have done it. The second reason is that there is now capacity for them to do it. There are hotels that are closed, boarding houses that are closed, and therefore these rooms would otherwise be empty. The government is paying the local authority to pay the hotelier and the boarding house owner. It's not a long-term solution, but you're right, it proves that there can be a solution, just like that. Richard in Manchester thinks Boris Johnson's doing a good job with the virus, so we better hear from Richard. Go ahead, Rich.
Hi, George. Not very often I agree with you, but I think that this guy is doing a phenomenal job for the country.
Yeah.
Do you remember I loaned him my vote, and he came on and said, thank you very much for the loan of the vote. He's been doing exceptionally well. I know you might disagree with me. And then, of course, this coronavirus comes on, and everybody's taken the opportunity to kick him. And I don't agree with it. They always say, and I'm sure you know this saying, never kick a man when he's down. And I think, as from Turkish poor background, like yourself from Scotland, and like myself from Manchester, I think we learn a lesson. We get tougher, we get stronger. And I don't think he's put off. Everybody calls him a clown. I heard Campbell calling him a liar, a liar, a liar about 12 times on the...
Campbell called him a liar. My God. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black.
Exactly, 11 times with John Bercow. You've got to see it. He's and to be fair to Bercow, he didn't call him a liar, but Campbell did it 11 times, George. Anyway, I thought I'd just say that our Messiah, Mr. Blair, was on this morning.
Oh, he's back. He's back. People are asking. Where's Sir Keir Starmer? I don't know, but I see that Tony Blair's back.
Well, if Keir Starmer comes back, we might as well have Tony Blair.
Exactly. Keir Starmer is Tony Blair without the laughs, without the pizzazz, without the polish.
But you probably haven't seen it today, but you've got to see it. And he's saying about, the Ebola virus in Africa, we cured this, the Tony Blair Institution. And I'm in touch with every leader of every nation in Africa. And then you look at South Africa, and I felt like saying to him, because I've been, like you, to South Africa, and to see the poor people there, and I'll tell you what, George, we've got nothing to worry about here. Honestly, I could cry for the people down there. They're going to be really sick, and they've got nothing. They've got absolutely nothing. And here's Blair with his 200 million, his 75 million pounds worth of assets, his private jet at £10,000 a time, his Tony Blair Institution. I'm not even jealous of a penny that he's got. But I tell you what, these people like Heseltine, these people like Blair, these people who went against us, you remember that 3.5-year war we had to get out of the European Union? I don't hear any of them saying, I'll come forward. You would, George, if you had 200 million. You'd be up in Scotland, you'd be saying to everybody, I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll do the other. Not boastfully, But these guys just come up and all they're thinking about themselves. They never mention anything like the poor people. It's all me, 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 and money, money, money. And I'm sorry to go on a bit, George, but I feel very...
You haven't persuaded me that Boris Johnson's doing a great job, but you've made a powerful telephone call, a powerful case just the same. Thanks, Richard, in Manchester. A legend's on the line. It's Norma in Bristol. Norma, go ahead.
Hello, George.
Are you staying safe, you and your husband?
Yes, yeah, we're very well looked after.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent.
This coronavirus, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so worrying. But, George, I got two very different comments. One is about the Excel Centre.
Yeah.
Every year, you know, it hosts the exhibition for buying and selling of weapons, including, like, we sell our arms to Saudi.
It's always been a hall of death.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm going to say. I mean, now the Excel Centre, sad though it is, worrying though it is, may have to deposit dead bodies there, you know. It's just a comment that I sort of thought about.
It's a really powerful comment. And I could hardly believe my eyes when I saw them setting up this 1 kilometre long hole as a morgue. Unless they're being alarmist, unless they're being pessimistic to the point of dread, are we really going to need all that morgue space? How many more people are dying on a daily basis now than died on that day last year? The answer is about a third more. However, if you took the average of the last 5 years, there are fewer people dying in Britain at the moment than died across that average of the 5 years. The problem is if this keeps on escalating, isn't it, Norma? The problem is if 1,000 becomes 2,000, becomes 4, becomes 6, becomes 8, that's the problem. That's when you're going to need the Excel Centre, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I get quite nervous, really. This is a diversion from stress now.
Yeah, good.
Okay?
I need one.
Yeah, this is it. So this week, we've seen two very, very old-fashioned films. One was made in 1938, that's the year of my birth, and one was in 1944. Now, one was called The Lady Vanishes, and I don't suppose you've seen it because you're too young.
No, I have seen it. It's a great film.
Thriller.
Yeah.
It was Margaret Lockwood and Michael Redgrave, and it was a thriller. And the other one, which we saw this afternoon, is Jane Eyre, with Joan Fontaine and a young Orson Welles.
Wow.
And it was very old-fashioned magnetic romance with over-dramatic music and the background. And, George, we enjoyed it, and it's relaxing.
Well, I'm going to watch it on your recommendation. Have you got Netflix, Norma?
No, that was just... We recorded it from yesterday.
Okay.
I think it was on BBC. I don't quite know. I was just
going to recommend two things to you and to the audience. First of all, you must check out Bob Dylan's first new song for, I think, at least a decade, nearly a decade anyway. It's called Murder Most Foul. It's 16 minutes long, and it deals with the murder, the assassination of Jack Kennedy in 1963, and goes through the 1960s. It is absolutely spellbindingly beautiful. You must listen to Bob Dylan's new song, Murder Most Foul. And the second thing, but you need Netflix for this, you need to watch Babylon Berlin. It is quite a long series. Amazingly, Brian Ferry pops up on the stage, performing live in the middle of the series. It's set in 1929 at the fag end of the Weimar Republic. You'll thank me for the recommendation. I hope to make a series like that out of my own novels Queensway. Still available on Amazon or directly from me at georgegalloway.com. info@georgegalloway.com. I wish I could play out with Bob's new song, but I can't. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time to the same place and bring somebody else with you. Good night.